CBS 4 News' Mike Kirsch in Kuwait on the brink of war.
Good evening again as we continue with this special expanded edition of the CBS Evening News. With war coming, many Western journalists have now left Baghdad. CBS News correspondent Lara Logan left today. She and her crew are now just across Iraq's western border in Jordan. A short time ago, I asked her what Iraqi military preparations or movements she saw on her way out.
Well, Dan, the first thing I noticed as we drove out of the city was Iraqi soldiers manning anti-aircraft guns on the top of buildings, including an apartment building. And then as we reached the outskirts of the city, there was a line of military activity on either side of the road, with at least 40 large flatbed trucks dug into the earth, the kind the military would use as launching pads for multiple rocket systems. And further down the road, about 6 miles, there was another site where we saw trenches, sandbagged fighting positions, and here there were dozens of huge cylindrical fuel containers. But strange as it may seem, the one thing that we really didn't see much of was Iraqi troops, and none of the fighting positions we saw were manned. There really wasn't a strong visual military presence anywhere, Dan.
And what was the mood in Baghdad as you left?
Well, people were really getting very nervous indeed. They were coming up to us asking tonight, looking for some kind of confirmation that the U.S. bombing would start tonight. Still, shops and businesses remain closed, and the streets that are normally crowded with traffic were virtually empty. There was really an eerie sense of calm on the surface, but then when you spoke to people, you got a sense of the fear and the panic underneath that. Most people do have weapons at home. Some said they were going to fight the Americans, but others said these are just for protection, and they plan to hide in their houses and wait until it's all over.
Lara Logan, near the Iraqi border in Jordan. Thanks. During the first Gulf War, Saddam Hussein fired dozens of Scud missiles at Israel. So this time around, the Israeli government is taking no chances. It ordered all Israelis today to keep their gas masks with them at all times. Thousands are leaving Tel Aviv, which was hit by Iraqi Scuds in 1991. But a far greater and more frantic exodus is taking place in Kuwait. Foreigners and Kuwaitis alike jammed the airport today, seeking a way out before the war starts. As in Israel, there is widespread fear in Kuwait that Saddam might respond to attack by firing missiles with chemical or biological warheads. This is the moment U.S. war planners have been waiting for, when the order to strike could come at any time. A short while ago, I discussed the plan and how it might unfold with retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General Buck Kernan, now a CBS News analyst. I asked him first about U.S. special operations, including special forces who will serve as the eyes and ears of the main invasion force and conduct raids deep inside Iraq.
The other thing the special operations forces are going to do is look for Scuds and weapons of mass destruction storage facilities or the delivery means, and do the Scud hunting that we remember in Desert Storm. And additionally, what they'll be also doing is working very closely with any opposition forces, friendly opposition forces inside Iraq that may be able to assist our operations.
Right now, there are 2 U.S. aircraft carriers in the Mediterranean with more than 100 attack jets ready to hit Iraq. Tomorrow, Turkey could decide to let those jets fly over its airspace. That, says the general, would be a big help.
We would like to have the flexibility of coming into Iraq from the north.
The 2 aircraft carriers here.
Correct.
With roughly how many combat aircraft on
About 70 on the average, about 70 per carrier.
Right. Right now, without Turkey granting permission for overflights, these planes have to do a sort of loop down here to come up?
That's right. They have to come back around and then come back in. Getting the airspace allows us to shorten the time-distance factor from the carriers into the areas where they're going to target.
Or the 2
much shorter
here.
distance coming this way than there is going around this way. Right now, we do not have permission to conduct operations out of Turkey, so they've already adjusted the plans, and they had an option play to be prepared to do that. I do not think there'll be a delay.
What is there that Saddam Hussein and his Iraqi forces could do, beginning at any moment, that would have the U.S. command say, never mind the kickoff date we have in mind, we have to move now?
If he was to do anything to jeopardize our forces or Kuwait, If he was to do something provocative, if he was to do a preemptive strike, we would immediately respond. We're watching those. We're watching those. But should we get an indicator that he was going to do something like launch a missile, or if we were to get an indicator that he was putting chemical or biological weapons on artillery or missile systems, then we would probably do something to prevent that.
You drop the hammer on him immediately.
I believe so.
With war coming, we want to give you a closer look now at the rank and file of the U.S. military. Who are the men and women who wear the uniform of the United States of America? CBS's Richard Schlesinger has been checking the stats, and he's come up with a picture of the U.S. Armed Forces. Richard?
Dan, a snapshot of today's military shows a force that is younger than the overall population, better educated, and more Southern. According to the Defense Department, almost 90% of all active duty recruits are under 25. Somewhere around 96% of those recruits have high school diplomas or the equivalent. That compares to roughly 75% of the non-military population. Percentage-wise, more African Americans are in the military than in the civilian sector, but the makeup of frontline combat units like infantry and special operations is overwhelmingly white. Where do most of the recruits come from? Not from around here, Dan. Over the last 15 years, the percentage of recruits from the Northeast and Midwest has decreased. The South and the West are sending most of the young people to the military, 40% from the South alone. And more of those soldiers, sailors, and what used to be called airmen are likely to be women. 15% of the active duty enlisted troops are female. And here's a trend that could dramatically change the look of tomorrow's military. The study shows that since the 80s, 1/3 fewer young men are showing an interest in enlisting in the armed forces. For the same period of time, the number of young women showing an interest in enlisting has remained steady. Dan.
Richard Schlesinger, thanks. Trading was light on Wall Street today as investors awaited the deadline for Saddam Hussein to leave Iraq, but the Dow managed another gain, posting its highest close in 2 months. And with oil markets betting on a quick war, the price of oil fell below $30 a barrel for the first time this year. The U.S. insists war with Iraq is not about oil, but there is a lot of oil at stake, as CBS's Anthony Mason reports.
The oil fields of Iraq may look rusted and run down, but underground here are enough crude reserves to reshape the balance of power in the politics of oil.
Is Iraq a grand prize?
The reserves are a grand prize.
More than 300 billion barrels in reserves, ranking Iraq second only to Saudi Arabia. UN sanctions have prevented Iraq from drilling for that oil. But even if Saddam is deposed, oil analyst John Kingston says Iraq will need help.
You're talking about developing billions of barrels of reserves in a country that has no money, that's certainly not going to have any money after a war. Where's the money for that going to come from?
From the Western oil giants, of course. But while its equipment may be antiquated, Iraq's national oil company is considered highly professional.
So the idea that we're just going to roll into Iraq and create our own deal, put the international oil companies in there to run things, that's simply not going to happen.
And once it taps into those reserves, Iraq, a founding member of OPEC, would be a rising power in the world's oil markets, strong enough to challenge even the Saudis. Because with upgraded technology, the Iraqis, who pump about 2.5 million barrels a day now, could pump as much as 6 million within a decade.
So the balance of power within OPEC will be very interesting because sort of they'll have a policeman again. Right now, Saudi Arabia calls the shots in OPEC. There'd be a counterbalance in the market.
But Saddam could slow that process down if, in retreat, he torches the oil fields, as he did in Kuwait.
The Kuwaitis had a lot of money to pay for the extinguishing of their fires, and the Iraqis don't have that money, and certainly their only cash crop, so to speak, is oil, and they won't be able to export it because it'll all be burning.
The cleanup could take 2 years, but an Iraq without Saddam, without UN sanctions, is still destined to be an oil superpower. Anthony Mason, CBS News, New York.
CBS News has long investigated air travel security, especially after the attack on America, 9/11. And we have new information for you tonight in this follow-up by CBS News correspondent Vince Gonzalez.
Just a few months after 9/11, CBS News tested checkpoint security at airports across the country, and 70% of the time, screeners failed. Back then, Bogdan Djokovic, a former member of the FAA's Red Team charged with testing airport security, came forward on CBS to say the security problems exploited by the terrorists could have been corrected.
It was a disaster waiting to happen, and myself and other individuals desperately tried to have this stuff fixed before September 11th, and absolutely nobody paid any attention.
A new report vindicates the whistleblower. U.S. Special Counsel Elaine Kaplan reported to the President and Congress that an investigation of the FAA confirmed a substantial likelihood of an abuse of authority and a substantial and specific danger to public safety.
It is a very positive statement that there was so much overwhelming evidence of wrongdoing on the part of the Federal Aviation Administration, and they finally acknowledged that.
Steve Elson worked with Djokovic on the Red Team and with CBS News during our undercover testing of airport checkpoints.
I think he's an American hero. I think he's suffered in his jobs, but it's nice to see that he's finally acknowledged as being correct, and his only goal has been to do something right for his country.
Investigators found the FAA did ignore reports of problems and failed to use the Red Team's results to improve aviation security. Officials could not prove Djokovic's allegations of a deliberate cover-up, but the special counsel said that doesn't matter because the result was the same. Aviation security was seriously compromised. The new Transportation Security Administration says all reported problems are now acted upon immediately and points out checkpoint screeners have recovered 4.8 million contraband items. But CBS News found high security failure rates again in August. And in just the last month, journalists doing the same types of tests reported the same types of security problems. Vince Gonzalez, CBS News, Los Angeles.
The U.S. government has imposed new travel restrictions on Cuban diplomats in this country. This came after Cuba slapped travel limits on U.S. diplomats there and rounded up what were called political dissidents. Why this? Why now? Fidel Castro was reportedly offended when a U.S. diplomat in Cuba met with the dissidents and said Castro is afraid of freedom. Just ahead on the CBS Evening News, Eye on America. They used to call military reservists weekend warriors. Not anymore.
CBS Tonight, Survivor is on a special night. The men and women are now living together with new tribes.
This is a strong team.
Shattered alliances and a love triangle that will leave you speechless.
Sweet.